Shadow of the Colossus, first released in 2005 on the PlayStation 2, was ported to PS3 in 2011, and was totally remade for PS4 in 2018. I played the PS3 version. I'm looking forward to eventually getting the PS4 remake, but I hadn't played this HD port and figured I'd better do so soon, since, based on the positive reviews the PS4 remake is getting, it'll be harder to go back if I play the new version first. The game is definitely a revered cult classic, and it's frequently mentioned as one of the big titles in the discussion of whether or not games are art. Even today, its minimalist narrative and massive sense of scale are breathtaking. Even if you play the original PS2 version with its low resolution and chopped up frame rate, it's still a gorgeous game. In Shadow of the Colossus, you play as Wander, a character only named in the closing credits, and the game begins with him riding his horse, Agro, with a young woman, Mono, like the kissing disease, in tow. He takes her to some sort of temple where a mysterious voice tells him that he can revive Mono, but only if Wander completes a task. Slay the 16 Colossi who inhabit the Forbidden Lands. And that's it. The game unfolds with Wander, wandering, finding a Colossus, killing it, and being transported back to the temple so he can do it again, over and over until they're all dead. It sounds simple, and it is, but the structure of the game is designed with purpose, and that purpose is to show off the size of the world and the Colossi, the smallness of Wander, and the damage that a single person, however small, can inflict in disturbing the natural order. It's an acknowledgement, a celebration, and a condemnation of an individual's unbridled willpower. Now it's a good time to mention that Shadow of the Colossus is a sequel of sorts to Ico, the previous game from Fumito Ueda and his team, Team Ico. It's set in the same universe as Ico, and the ending firmly sets Shadow as a prequel, but it's more about the thematic connections than any kind of coherent timeline. Due to its minimalist style, Shadow is even more mysterious than its predecessor, and both games are ripe for interpretation. Some people think Shadow is a biblical metaphor, a retelling of the book of Genesis, due to the secret garden and the creation of a new form of life out of the squandering of a previously held status quo. Some people think it's just about trickster snake oil salesmen, or about the folly of running off half-cocked with only a hope, a prayer, and a magical sword. My interpretation is that it's about raging against the natural order of things, for better or for worse. It's never stated why Mono is dead beyond her being the victim of a cursed fate. But the little context we're given suggests that Wander is willing to take her body, steal a magic sword, head for a location called the Forbidden Lands, and strike a deal with a shadowy entity to slay titanic beasts in order to bring her back. That takes some kind of love. Is she his girlfriend? Does he just have a crush on her? Are they brother and sister? It's all deliberately vague. If he loves her like a dumb teen loves a girl, a theory which is commonly held by much of the fandom, then maybe the whole game is just a metaphor for the futility of romantic love. The world did not fit the mold he wanted, so he stole the sword, stole her body, and set off, not to save a life, not to make things right, but to get his way. Wander goes to hell and back and changes the world, but at what cost? He destroys himself, unleashes an ancient evil upon the land, is corrupted by said evil, and is permanently disfigured by being reborn as a baby with horns, presumably establishing a new status quo that will one day lead to the events of Ico. Wander saves the girl. Good for him. But he unleashed a terrible evil and damned his own bloodline forever. Part of the backhanded success comes from the slaying of the titular Colossi. They're giant creatures who are secretly the essence of Dorman, and killing one causes their darkness to latch onto Wander, at which point he passes out and is returned to the shrine. Some people see each Colossus as a beautiful beast, pure nature personified. but I don't know if that's actually the case. Each Colossus turns to stone upon death. It's unclear if they were living beings imbued with the essence of Dormin, or if Dormin's essence, scattered throughout the Forbidden Lands, took the shape of the long-dead residents of the region, or simply took whatever shape their dark powers could manage. Again, nothing is actually explained in-game, so it's up to each player to decide what's really going on, either to justify Wander's actions or to condemn his cruelty. Some of the Colossi are immediately hostile to Wander, but some of them just ignore him until they're provoked. At least one of them, the flying sand dragon in particular, doesn't even have any means of actively attacking the young man. The only way to actually get hurt during the fight is to fall off its back or get struck down as collateral damage when it dives under the sand. How sentient are the Colossi? I see them as 1/16th of a dark god, or at least 1/16th of some kind of supernatural entity. Many players feel guilty at slaying these gargantuan creatures, many of whom are simply minding their own business before Wander climbs up their hairy arm and then stabs them in the head. But I think the true indictment comes later, when they learn that they've been playing into Dormin's hand the whole time. I, personally, tend to see the Colossi as automatons, mindless creatures powered by dark energy, though that viewpoint doesn't always hold up. Like, why is the 11th Colossus afraid of fire? I guess a good comparison here could be Frankenstein's monster, who is similarly warded off by flames. Frankenstein's monster is created from parts robbed from graves, and then implanted with an abnormal brain and animated with the harnessed power of a bolt of lightning. Does Frankenstein have a soul? If the 11th Colossus is Dormin's dark essence infused into a pile of rocks, does the resultant creature know what it is? Is it alive? I mean, Wander does manage to kill them all. Some fights are easier than others, but many of the creatures display behavior that seems counter to their survival instinct. Like, why don't the aquatic ones just dive deep underwater right away? Why don't they hide from Wander? Why don't the avian colossi fly in corkscrew patterns to shake him off? Is it possible that they are mere puppets, and all of their behavior is faked by Dormin, who holds their strings and manipulates them to make it look like they're putting up a fight? It's true that Wander can get killed in battle, but maybe those deaths are all accidental on the part of Dormin, who is just trying a little bit too hard to maintain the illusion that Wander is actually defeating these monsters on his own. This would also explain why the player only ever encounters one Colossi at a time. Sure, it would probably melt a PS2 to have two giant monsters fighting at once, but maybe Dormin can only control one Colossus at a time. It's all a mystery. There is so much that is unknown in Shadow of the Colossus, from the creatures to the malevolent entity to the Forbidden Lands themselves. There are clues, innuendos, implications, and a certain level of context, but so much is left for the player to interpret. And most players can ultimately project themselves into the game, not unlike classic silent protagonists like the Doom Guy and Gordon Freeman. Are you a hopeless romantic? Then the game's a love story, and Wander is being tricked by Dormin, who is abusing his good-natured heroic intentions for his own diabolical schemes. Are you a jaded cynic? Then Wander is a fool who gets played as he deserves. The objective truth, if one even exists for this game, is well hidden by Ueda and his team. We've gone over a lot of the mystery and story and context of the game, but as in all video games, that's only part of the experience, and some people don't care about it at all. To them, the plot is just an excuse to slay one Colossus and then 15 more. And to be honest, that's totally awesome. As much as overanalyzers like myself enjoy mulling over the thematic implications of the action at hand, perhaps even creating deeper meaning where none exists, it's also easy to overlook the moment-to-moment mechanics of the game. Shadow of the Colossus has elements of platforming, action, and exploration, but at its core, it's a puzzle game. Each of the 16 beasts must be taken down, and the player must figure out how to land an attack on a weak point, even if it's 50 feet in the air and attached to a giant monster who doesn't want to die. Climbing a Colossus is a monumental task, and they all must be taken down in unique ways. The first Colossus is like a test boss, the tutorial, and there's no real strategy to climbing it or reaching its weak points. You just do it. It's pretty straightforward. Number 2 introduces sparkling weak points, which must be shot before the player can reach a climbable surface on the beast. Then, number 3 introduces environmental variables. The player must get the Colossus to strike his sword at a certain spot so they can damage their own armor and become vulnerable to attack. Running up the sword of that creature is one of the most iconic moments in the whole game, and it's a breathtaking moment of spectacle, puzzle solving, and the sheer determination of the player character. Whether he's a sociopath or just a love-struck kid, it takes a lot of guts to go head-to-head with a being of that size and strength. And they only get more elaborate from there, with clever and creative bosses who require tactics and cunning, and always feel like they're part of the world, albeit a world that is decrepit, blasted out, and dying. Except for the 14th Colossus. He sucks. He's about the size of an Alaskan husky, and his boss fight feels way too much like something you'd see in, well, a video game. The way you have to go from pillar to pillar is repetitive and boring, and if he hits you, Wander gets stuck in a cycle of pain where you have but a split second to recover before getting knocked down again. I really don't like that boss. I also didn't have a great time with number 15, but I think that might be because of a quirk with the PS3 version of the game. Apparently, the frequency at which Colossi will try to shake you off is directly tied to the game's frame rate. On the PS2, hardware limitations kept the frame rate frustratingly low, but the PS3 version is set to a relatively stable 30 FPS. It's gorgeous, but I felt that with a few of the Colossi, particularly number 15, the fights just dragged on because I didn't have enough time to charge up my sword thrust before I'd get shaken off again. I even ran out of stamina. Twice. The fight took about an hour, and that was after I already knew what to do. Most of it was tedious, rather than enthralling. Of course, the fights themselves are only half the gameplay of Shadow of the Colossus. The other half comes from the pre-fight exploration. When in sunlight, a single button press causes Wander to hold his sword up to the sky, which calls down a beam of light which shows him the general direction of the next target. For the most part, it works really well, though number 15 is a bit tricky since following the path directly leads to a dead end. Still, once you consult the map, it's simple enough to figure out where you're supposed to go. Generally, the controls are great. I appreciate that the platforming isn't as automatic as something later like Tomb Raider Legend or Uncharted, and I especially like that you have to press R1 to grab onto ledges. However, there are some moments where certain jumps can be a real hassle. The trek to the third Colossus was a serious threat to my long-term enjoyment of the game. I fell off like 5 times, and it was beyond obnoxious. Size is a huge theme, so to speak, of Shadow of the Colossus. Obviously, the titular creatures are gigantic, but so too is the overworld, and it's completely desolate, save for a smattering of silver-tailed lizards, plant life, birds, and some fish. A squirrel and a deer also appear in the ending, but it's unclear if the temple's rooftop garden is part of the Forbidden Land's natural ecosystem. The point is, it must have taken a lot of restraint to keep side missions out of this game. It's easy to see a man in a suit asking Team Eco to include disposable enemies, racing challenges, or bow and arrow trials, but that would really clash with the intent of the game. The open world isn't meant to be a sandbox of activity, but a quietly peaceful and undisturbed location. It's not a place to be explored, but to overwhelm the player with its sheer size and openness and Wander's microscopic insignificance within it. The player is supposed to get an unsettling feeling as they search for their next mark, like they're not supposed to be here. It's a wide open area with vast plains and no humans. What right does Wander have to trespass on this sacred ground? You're supposed to feel small because you are a virus invading a long-forgotten, forbidden territory, killing its inhabitants and releasing their suppressed darkness. And that's not even a metaphor. But of course, it also is. Even Wander's horse is much larger than he is, as contrasted by the size of Lord Iman's posse as they pursue our diminutive protagonist. Team Eco obviously didn't need to make Wander so short, since a Colossus would tower over him whether he's 4 or 6 feet tall. But they did it, not just to make him seem younger, but to make him stronger, or weaker, depending on how you want to look at his character. He's so brave for going up against these colossal monsters, or he's so out of his depth, he thinks he's doing the right thing when he's really just ruining everything. Speaking of the horse, Agro seems a pretty typical video game animal companion, but the structure of the game and the emptiness of the world causes the player to slowly, subconsciously even, build a relationship with her. The first time I played Shadow of the Colossus as a teenager, I cried when Agro fell to her presumed death. Sitting on the floor in front of my cousin's old-timey tube TV, I developed a bond with that horse, and to have it ripped away without warning was just too much for my little heart to take. At times, Agro's importance is simply virtue of utility. Without her, it would just take forever to get anywhere, and I would have quit the game early. More importantly, though, she's the only friendly creature within 1,000 miles, or at least it seems that way. Mono is dead, Dorman is a mysterious taskmaster, the Colossi are assassination targets, and the silver-tailed lizards are a gameplay mechanic more than anything, and there's certainly no kinship between them and Wander. Agro's all he's got, and losing her right before the final battle is a terrible blow. And it's not one of those cheesy deaths that motivates the hero. It's more a case of him pushing her too hard and causing her death himself. It's not really his fault that the structure collapsed under their combined weight, but they should never have been there in the first place. This far into the game, right before the last real fight, Wander knows this, and the player knows this. And killing Agro is one last screw you to Wander's hopes of ever having a happy ending in all this madness. Agro pops up at the end of the game, injured but alive, but animal experts know that a horse with a broken leg faces a long and difficult road to recovery. Just saying, Agro's prognosis isn't great. After clearing the game and watching the credits, there's a New Game Plus mode and time attack challenges, which reward new equipment. But I don't think I'm going to tackle either of those, at least not soon. Not just because I have a stack of about 1,000 games vying for my attention, but because I feel like I finished the game. Completion means different things to different people, and it varies from game to game. I can't imagine going through the original Spyro the Dragon and not collecting every single gem. It's that kind of game. But I also can't imagine beating every single side quest in The Witcher 3, or finding every single location in any open-world Bethesda game. In this case, it has to do with how each player sees the Colossi. For some, going back to re-challenge the monsters is a natural instinct. They want to hone their skills and become masters of each battle. For me, I don't want to go back and exploit the nature of video games. I want to remember each fight as it was, a grueling duel to the death, where I was thinking on my toes, scratching my head in frustration, and shouting in joy when I figured out what I needed to do. Distilling the story of my 16 emotional roller coaster rides into meticulously calculated tests of skill, speed, and memory just isn't what I want from Shadow of the Colossus right now. And this isn't a knock against the inclusion of this type of extra mode. I don't want to think about how much time I spent over the years doing VR missions in Metal Gear Solid or Dead Man Walking mode in Max Payne 2. And it's also not to say that I won't change my mind. Someday in the future, when I'm not thinking about Wander's motivations or Mono's hatred of this young man who simultaneously saved her and condemned her to a life in the Forbidden Lands with a baby and a crippled horse, I can see myself saying, let's give it a shot, and trying my hand at Time Attack. The rewards, which include new weapons and equipment, are tempting, but I wonder if they were originally going to be discovered in the main game world, but were removed because they were just unnecessary distractions. On one hand, it would be super cool to find a cave, explore it, and find the Lizard Detection Stone, or the Harpoon of Thunder, but it would likely get in the way of the melancholy tone of the game and Wander's systematic extermination of the Colossi. Like I said before, the open world isn't meant to be explored by the player, but to envelop and intimidate them. It's funny. I can think about and muse on Shadow of the Colossus all day, but it's not one of my favorite games. Not even close. I only played through it twice. Once on PS2 around 12 years ago, and then again on PS3 in 2018. I don't like to play favorites, since both are important and have distinct things to say, but I must confess to having a preference for Ico over Shadow of the Colossus. Both games have provocative narratives which are ripe for interpretation, mysterious characters with ambiguous motivations and backstories, and both are artistically minimalist in how they present their context to the player, but I guess I just prefer the moment-to-moment linear platforming / puzzle-solving adventure of Ico to Shadow of the Colossus' more mission-based design, subversive though it may be. I don't know if I'm smart enough to make this analogy, but Ico is like a short story, and Shadow of the Colossus is like a painting. They're both art, and they're both classics. I just happen to like one more than the other, but which one is better really doesn't matter all that much to me. Shadow of the Colossus is one of those games that is never really dropped out of the conversation, even more than a decade after its initial release. It really is like a painting, with numerous critics and fans offering their theories and interpretations of its events, while simply admiring its beauty and enjoying its mechanics. Even if it's not one of my personal favorite games of all time, I can still find so much to love and appreciate on so many levels. It's a game that sits with you, informs your life, and is informed by your life for years after you put the controller down.